Nothing we say is investment advice. Please pause on all 3 pages of this disclaimer and read it.
Greetings, Algo artisans. It is Sunday, April the 13th. This is Nick Pietruzzello with the weekly market forecast. Before we get into the charts, we're going to jump into the economic calendar, the data that's going to come out this week, as that can affect the charts. And after that, we're going to take a look at Bitcoin, Solana, EURUSD, GBPUSD, USDJPY, USDCAD, GBPJPY, AUDJPY, AUDUSD, USDCHF, SP500 Futures, Dow Futures, NASDAQ Futures, gold, and silver. So let's jump into the economic calendar right now. Okay, so not much happening on Monday. Tuesday, we've got GBP claimant count change. That's unemployment data happening right at the European Open. And then we have Canadian CPI data all coming out at 8:30 AM EST. That'll be pretty big deal for the Canadian dollar most likely. Then we have, again at the European Open, the British CPI. That's Wednesday morning their time. 8:30 AM retail sales, Canadian data coming out, big data coming out at 9:45 AM, Bank of Canada monetary policy report, rate statement, and overnight rate. And then we have the press conference after that at 10:30. And then a big day as well for the US dollar at 1:30 PM. Fed Chair Powell speaks at a conference. And given everything that's going on right now, there's going to be just microscopes watching that. Everyone is going to pay attention to every word he says, and the market could move based on that. If he even hints at cutting rates sooner than he planned or later than he planned or anything, markets could get wild. So I might be avoiding the markets as a whole on Wednesday. We'll see about it. Maybe some scalps here and there. Later, 6:45 PM, New Zealand dollar CPI data quarter over quarter. Aussie employment data at 9:30 PM EST. Thursday, we have big time data for the euro monetary policy statement and refi rate. 8:15 AM EST for the euro data. As usual, 8:30 AM EST unemployment claims for the US. 8:45 is the press conference for the euro. That's EST. And then the markets might be kind of quiet, especially on Friday and later on Thursday, because a lot of markets will be closed as Easter is coming and a lot of banks will be on bank holiday on Friday. So Friday's probably not going to be that great of a day to trade. And even Thursday, after the data comes out, is probably going to slow down. All right, let's jump into the charts. We'll start with Bitcoin. Now, markets are very unpredictable. Last week, I got a couple right, but it was extremely difficult to get anything right in this environment. Trump went ahead and reversed his policy for most of the tariffs, all the countries in the world except for China, and he even did quietly reverse some of his policies for China as well. So that did cause the market to move in pretty much the opposite direction that I thought it would for a lot of things, but we'll also see that there were a couple of currencies that actually did what I thought they would, and the clue there is that those will be the ones that might not be quite as affected by the news and better to trade in the crazy environment. So we'll start with Bitcoin. 82 is an important number here, that blue line. You can see that $82,000 is where price tends to want to bounce up. If it goes below 82, it wants to also bounce down off of that once it goes back up to 82. So 82,000 is an important number. And the question is, if price were to head down, as the algos say, if there were no surprises this week, up until this dotted line here, which is when Fed Chair Powell speaks, my predictions end when he speaks this week, right? I usually do that because those are the big events that we know about. What if Trump comes in and says no more tariffs? Then everything I've said probably just won't matter for most charts. But in this case, if the algos do what it looks like they're going to do, Bitcoin will probably head sideways with a little dose of down. It could flip up pretty hard at any minute because we do have some pretty strong support at 82,000, and along with some of the algorithmic, we'll call them algorithmic supports. I don't know what else to call it, but I don't want to reveal too much of the secret sauce. We could see price jump up a little unpredictably, but right now I'm looking at a move down, probably down to 80,000, maybe to come back up and test that. But really a lot of different things can happen, and that's going to be the story this week with a lot of charts. Extremely unpredictable, not just because of what's happening with Trump and the news and all of that, but also because of where markets literally are right now. There's a lot of confusion in markets, there's a lot of uncertainty, and price kind of moves on a whim. It's very difficult to trade outside of, say, like maybe some swing trading or day trading, but high time frame trading is very difficult right now. So doing a high time frame look like this is a little bit risky, but this is what the algos say should happen. Let's take a look at Solana. So again, all the disclaimers about Bitcoin apply to all the charts this week. just a lot of lack of predictability. Price can move in crazy ways. Just assume that I said that for every chart. Solana here, I think is going to go sideways to down, might pop up to test the last weekly high at about 134, and it could come down to test about 119. Now, if price gets bearish, it's probably going to want to head down towards 108, but I don't know if it's going to get there by Thursday. It would have to be a pretty tragic fall. It could certainly happen, but I think we're going to see maybe a bounce around 120 and a range lock unless we get some crazy news. Let's take a look at EURUSD. So interestingly enough, the euro performed last week how I thought it would despite all of the news. So this should tell you a couple of things. It should tell you, believe it or not, that in a certain way, the European and the US banks are kind of moving pretty similarly, which is not that abnormal of a thing, but in the current environment, you would think they would stop moving in tandem quite as much. But in this case, it seems that the European and US markets are all affected in the same way by what's happening internationally, despite the fact that the tariffs were also put on Europe. Of course, once Trump took those tariffs away, obviously we saw what was going on a little bit in that he may or may not have planned to hold those tariffs for too long. Whatever the case may be, whatever the news is, the euro and the dollar moved the same way that I thought they would last week, right? The blue prediction right there. So here's what I expect, sideways to up. And again, the prediction ends on Wednesday. Let's move over to British pound, US dollar. I do expect the British pound to have some bullishness, but we're up against some weekly highs here. So a high up at 132.08 and 131.45. Price might have a hard time getting past that, but I think it's going to continue to push up against that unless we see some kind of a surprise. Now, price always could dump down and grab some liquidity, maybe down at about 129.70 or even down at 128.740, but I don't think it's necessarily going to do that. I think it's going to be range locked until it can break through these resistances, provided that nothing big changes. Let's take a look at USDJPY. The entire Japanese yen look right now, the Japanese yen tends to look very strong, making all the JPY pairs look weak because JPY pair is on the second half, right? So JPY gets strong, these pairs go down, and I do expect to see USDJPY slide down a bit. We might get a bounce at 142.07 right here at this prior support, but I do think eventually, if not right away, price will come down. Either it bounces or it doesn't. Let's take a look at USDCAD. So the loonie was one of the ones that moved as I thought it would. And we're seeing a kind of a pattern here where if it's US, Canada, Europe, price doesn't seem to be reacting all that crazily to whatever the news is, right? The blue prediction is last week, did more or less what I thought. And this is what I think will happen this week. Maybe not quite as much bearishness, but I still think it's going to be sideways to down. It's just a question of what happens in the meantime. So I think it's going to extend and then go sideways or go sideways and extend down. And the lowest point I would expect to be around 136.67, but it might not even get down that low. It might bounce around 137.28 or so. Let's take a look at the beast, GBPJPY. I just expect sideways and range locked like last week. This might be good for some scalps if you're a range trader, but price does seem to be stuck right now more or less between 189.84 at the top and maybe 185.83 at the bottom. Maybe we'll see. This might have been a diversion here on the bottom. We'll see how that goes, but I just expect sideways to down. Let's take a look at AUDJPY. Again, sideways to down, and this one doesn't look like it's going to do a whole lot, but it could surprise us. But if the algos do what the algos say they're going to do, I just expect this to kind of slide to the right and maybe a little bit down. Could be a little deeper down. You know, this one has been historically bearish, but it is coming up from being bearish, so there might be kind of a bull market rally feel. So I think price is going to have a hard time breaking above 91.33. Now, if it does, then your next levels to look at are going to be probably 93.09. I just don't expect it to do that. At most, I expect it to kind of test the top here and then try to head down after that. Let's take a look at AUDUSD. Aussie dollar with a little bit more bullish of a look, but it is up against a lot of resistance. If you look back here, this is a massive liquidity zone, and this is going back to last year in December. So basically between 62 cents and about 63.8. That's the range, but it's a very big range, and there tends to be a little bit more of a tighter range if you look back through time here, and that's between 62.64 and 62.99, or basically 63. So price may want to hang out in that range, might also dive down and grab some liquidity lower into the 62.14 area, but mostly sideways with a slight tinge of up. I just don't think it's going to break above 63.86, at least not until after Powell speaks on Wednesday. Let's look at the Swissy. Swissy has been very bearish, but it looks like it's in the middle of a bear market rally. So it may do what I just drew. It might also need to grab liquidity first and then pop up. It's kind of hard to tell right now. So I don't expect a lot out of it. Sideways, maybe a pop up, but ultimately I think this is going to want to actually extend down. But I think we might just see the pop up before Wednesday, right? So let's take a look at the SP500 Futures. The most difficult to predict right now. If the algos rule the day and there's no major news, I expect price to actually try to reclaim some of these highs, but then get rejected down. The high time frame is very bearish. However, we do have, again, what I like to call algorithmic support, and there is that chance the price could pop up and get bullish right here. Now, of course, news could change any of this. We talked about that before, but in the meantime, these are the two main looks that I have for the SP500, and you'll find that the other two indices look the same. So let's go to the Dow. Again, Dow looking the same. We might get that surprise pop upward, but aside from that, I think we're going to see some sideways to down. Again, that's just going to be really reliant on news or whether or not the algorithmic support comes through. I could say the high time frame is very, very bearish. I do not have a lot of hope that this will break above 41,000, but of course it could. We'll see what happens. Let's look at NASDAQ Futures. And NASDAQ is the big ticket. Same exact story. We could get a pop up, maybe at the most 20,530, but I don't think it'll make it there. I think any pop ups to get rejected probably around 20,000 and then start to head back down. Either way, sideways to down is the look on this unless something changes. Let's take a look at gold. Gold continuing to not care, although it has extended quite a bit, so I do expect it to take a break. However, I have in the past expected it to take a break when it didn't. I think $3,500 gold is on the horizon, but I think we might just see a week of sideways for now. Of course, if it were to break out of this area, I would expect that breakout to be to the upside, unless it needs to grab liquidity, right? So it's possible it could break down. If it did, I don't think it'll go very far, but gold really has been ramping up ever since the tariff news was reversed with the exception of China. Let's take a look at silver. Again, silver, I don't expect a whole lot sideways. It's in the middle of a move up, but I do think it's going to take a break, and if it does break out of this, what I think will be a range, I think that break would be topside. So again, difficult week for predictions, difficult month. This is what we call Trump era trading, where news really can make a big difference, and we can tell that Trump himself is unleashed as compared to his first term. So his ability to make waves and change things is much more than it used to be. And that's all fine and good if you are a trader, because you can take advantage of price moving up or price moving down. You can pivot in the middle of your day or in the middle of your week if things change. And we teach you how to do that over at algofactory.tech. Now, firstly, go ahead and take a look at your free algo right there. You can see it. Get your free algo. Link is in the description. Go down there, click that link. I will send you an algo as soon as you give us your email. It'll take you to the next screen where I give away that algo. I'll also email it to you. We'll send you some updates, market updates on Sundays and things like that. We'll keep you up to date as to what we think is happening with the markets. But if you do that, you get a free algo, and it's awesome. In the meantime, come over to algofactory.tech. We'd love to talk to you. We teach people how to build their own trading method, their own algos. We have some guys that are doing some awesome work in there. And if you watch the YouTube channel, maybe once a month, once every couple of months, you'll see somebody on there actually working with their algo, and I'll coach them. If you go back over the last few months, I'll have a couple of shows where I'm live coaching people. So go check that out as well, algofactory.tech. We will show you how to trade like a hedge fund pro. Thank you for watching. See you next week. Or we will see you Tuesday, which technically is this week, and that's at 8:30 a.m. EST.